Julian here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make house music like Steppa. We're going to be focusing more on his kind of more recent sort of like, more minimal sound as opposed to his more old school, like very deep house based stuff. Still, of course, bringing in that influence, but yeah, kind of focusing more on the more modern sound. As usual, you can get the project file and samples, and MIDI and presets, and all of that stuff in this video in the description. And if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. Yeah, let's get started. So, first sound we have here is the kick, which sounds like this. So this is just a very deep and punchy kick. The thing that I've noticed is with a lot of these tracks, not just low Steppa's tracks, but honestly just a lot of house in the style, is the kick is very deep like this. Like, it's very kind of like round sounding in a weird way, if that makes sense. It's kind of like the low end is very round, but then the high end has a lot of punch to it. So this is a kick that I made by layering a few other kicks together. And that's what I was aiming for when I made this. And that's kind of what I would be aiming for as well if I were you making these kind of kicks. It's like, you want something with that nice, really deep, round low end to it that's very soft and sort of gummy. But then you have that high end still really, really hitting so that it'll punch through the mix. For effects on there, I've just got a bit of drum bus to fatten it up. Here's without this. And then with it, you can hit a difference there. This is something I do in almost every video, but of course, it just works so well, and it's one of those things, it's kind of like part of my style, I guess. But it's one of those things that you'll never really, like, change doing. You always need to fatten your kick up. You always need to use saturation to glue things together, and drum bus is definitely my saturation of choice. The only other effect I have on there is this EQ8. This is just cutting out some low mid-range. You can see it's actually scooping it quite a bit, still keeping 100 hertz and everything below that intact. But yeah, this is just cleaning it up. This helps with that kind of softness. Here's without it. A lot of those like low mid-range frequencies tend to make it sound a bit boxy. So when you cut those, it cleans those out. And yeah, that is it for the kick. The next sound we have here is the bass, which sounds like this. So here's the bass line. It's really simple. This track is in F sharp minor, so it's just playing F sharp and then bouncing up to this A here, just the minor third of F sharp minor. And then for the sound, what we've got going on is we have three layers. We have this one, kind of like a more standard house mid-range bass. Then we got this one, which is a sub. And this one, which is more of that like deep house, FM, dunk sort of bass sound. So basically the idea here is this would be like a normal bass that you would hear in one of these type of house tracks, right? Just very fat and deep with still some nice mid-range to it. But then when you add this on top of it, it brings in that old school deep house influence like I was talking about, while still working in this kind of a track. So yeah, so the first layer is really simple. It's just made using operator. You can see we've got a saw wave with two sine waves doing a little bit of FM, and then those are all going into a low pass filter, which you can see I got the shaper on that, so that just makes it a bit fatter. I've also got a small amount of an envelope, and then I just have an EQ8 cutting out the low end for that one. The second layer, which is the donk, is even more simple. This one is just two sine waves in operator FMing each other. That's how you make this kind of a sound. And then I just have a bit of a high pass filter cutting out the low end. And then the last layer is the sub, which is even more simple, which you can see is just one sine wave. And then I'm going into a saturator to fatten it up and give it a little bit more body and give it some extra harmonic content. So yeah, those are the three layers. I just have them in an instrument rack here. It's really simple. Again, it's like just this simple bass, and then adding the FM bass on top of that. So then I have a few effects on all three layers at once. As I always say, this ties everything together and helps to really make it sound like one bass. So the first thing here is this drum bus. This is just saturating it a little bit, gluing these together. Then we have a compressor, side chaining it to the kick. That is a pretty standard procedure. And then the last thing we got in there is this EQ8, which is boosting the low end as well as cutting at 100 hertz, which helps to make room for the kick a little bit. Yeah, that is it for the bass. I have the kick and the bass in a group, also known as a bus. This is a low end bus here. So again, this is one of those techniques I do in a lot of these videos. But it just works. Like, it's what you need to do to really make your low end sound fat and powerful. When I find, like, when people put their kick, like, in the group with the drums, for example, you just don't really get that same, like, fullness in the low end like this. This is really the way that you do that. So what we got here for effects is just these two EQ8s. These are just kind of like focusing the sound a little bit. I'll turn these off. And you can see this drum bus here. If I don't have these on, it fattens the sounds up, but it can make them a bit muddy, just by the nature of what saturation does. So these just, like I said, focus the sound. Yeah, they cut out the muddy, low mid-range, give it a bit of a low-end boost. Also got a mid-range boost there for some punch. A lot of punch is in the kick there, and even in the bass. And yeah, they're very simple. And then the only other effect on there is the drum bus. So here's without it. Like I said, this is the thing that really makes the low end sound like one. It really glues it all together and kind of puts it all in the same place. And yeah, that is it for the low end. Next thing we have here are these stabs, which start with this one, which sounds like this. So these are the kind of stabs you can hear in a lot of this style of house, both in like the more deep house styles and the more like modern kind of techie house type of stuff. It's just a nice, simple, sort of like rhythmic melodic element. Like it adds some melodic stuff to the track, but it's very rhythmic. It's very much just kind of like, you know, playing with the percussion, and it can almost be seen as a form of percussion in that way. So for the sound on this one, or at least the notes, it's just this one chord. It's just an F sharp minor 9. So these minor 7 and 9 and major 7 and major 9 chords as well are really good for the style because they give you that more jazzy kind of like deep sound, right? Like if I just make these minor chords, like regular minor chords, you can hear it doesn't have as much of that like character to it. So yeah, definitely recommend playing around with those. You can also see we got a bit of swing on everything here, like all these 16 notes are slightly off the grid. This is with every layer in this track. It's just kind of like giving everything a little bit more groove, a little bit more swing. But yeah, for the sound on this one, it's made using operator. What we've got here is 4 sine waves, doing some FM here, and then they're going into a low pass filter. So here's before that. And then with it, that's what makes it kind of sound like a pluck. Then after that, we've got a bit of chorus, just kind of spreading the sound out, as well as a bit of reverb to give it some space. You can see that's really short. And the last thing we have on there is a bit of drum bus to fatten it up and really give it that punch. One thing I was noticing when I was putting this up against reference tracks is that if you don't really make an effort to make your stabs and like these kind of sounds sound fat, they're not really going to hold up. Like it's not really going to work. You really need these to sit in the right place in the mix. And this is how you do that, is by trying to make them as fat as possible. The next sound we have here is the second stab, which sounds like this. So this one's really simple. This is also just playing an F sharp minor 7 chord actually, so it's just the minor 9 chord. You can see it actually does go up to a minor 9 there, just missing that top voice. So yeah, really simple. It's just playing in a few parts. This is just kind of like a little accent sound. With this one, it's just 4 sine waves, or a saw wave, and then 3 sine waves, inside of operator. Going into a bandpass filter with an envelope on it. Then we got some chorus, some reverb, pretty much the same as the last stab. Bit of drum bus as well. And yeah, this one's really simple. And then the last stab that we have here is the third one, which sounds like this. So this is meant to be a little bit of a different type of sound. I was going for more of like an old school funk type of synth like you would hear with all that vibrato. You can see this one, again, just playing F sharp minor 9. And for the sound on this one, it's actually made using analog. We've got 2 saw waves, an octave apart. I've got them detuned a little bit as well. Going into a low pass filter, the low pass has an envelope on it, which, as you can imagine, that's how we're getting that. It's kind of like closing like that. Then we've got the amp envelope set like this. And then the last thing inside the synth here is just a bit of vibrato. Like I said, that gives it that cool kind of like vibe, no pun intended. But like, it helps to make this a bit more interesting. It stands out a lot when you hear it in the track that way, because it's like I said, these kind of like funky synth stabs with a lot of vibrato on them are a very familiar sound, I feel like. And the only effect I have on there is just a bit of chorus, just kind of spreads it out a little bit, puts it in a little bit of a kind of more, I don't want to say like a background place in the mix, but it helps so it's not fighting for space with like the kick and bass and the drums and all the stuff that's right up front. This can be more of like a extra element this way. So then I have all the stabs in a group together. We just have a little bit of processing on there. I've just got a bit of chorus, so it's just giving everything a little bit more space. and spreading it out. That was another thing I was noticing, is that like with these kind of stabs, really you want them to sound sampled and you want them to have a lot of character to them. And the only way you can do this is by adding like a lot of chorus and a lot of saturation and stuff. So having a chorus on here, even though I do have a chorus on each of these individually, I feel like it does work pretty well. And then the only other effect I have on there is just a bit of drum bus. This helps. You can see I've got the transients up there, so it makes these hit really hard. And you can hear how that makes it really like sound full. And then also it's just kind of fattening everything up with the saturation. And yeah, that is it for the stabs. And then the next thing that we have here are all these drums. So I'm just going to go down the list here. So the first thing we got is the clap, which sounds like this. So this one's simple. It's really more about the type of sound you choose. You just want this like fat, kind of mid-rangey clap. And part of that is the drum processing. But yeah, if you get one that's too like bright or too like small sounding, it's not going to work. You need something really fat with a lot of body like this. And if you want this one, the link is in the description. But yeah, I just have a bit of drum bus on that. You can hear it kind of brings it out a bit more. And that is it for the clap. The next thing that we have here is this little rim shot, which sounds like this. I'll play it in the mix. So you can hear this one really straightforward. It's just adding like a little bit of some percussion there. You know, kind of like helps to fill in the space a little when there's not a stab playing. And I feel like this also brings in a lot more of that like deep house kind of influence. You know, this sounds very deep housey, especially with all that swing that's on there. Yeah, so this one, you know, just your standard sort of deep house rim shot. And that is that. The next sound that we have here is the shaker, which sounds like this. So what this is I have these two shaker samples actually. And then I put them into a drum rack. So I got them playing. And then on top of those I have a tambourine, which I'm just considering this part of the shaker because it really is. It's just kind of adding something. Rather than like having it be a super obvious tambourine, I just have it in there more for like the high end. So you can hear the shaker on its own. It's nice. But then when you add that brightness to it, you know, that's what really makes it stand out in the mix. So that's that. But yeah, really simple. Well, this one is just more about the sounds. Again, it's just like that clap. It's like getting something really full and fat like this. After that, we have the main hi-hat, which is 3 layers, and it sounds like this. So what's going on here is we have 2 main layers, and then we have this one little extra hi-hat, which I'll talk about. So the 2 layers on their own, or the 2 main layers on their own, sound like this. So you can hear we have this one to be more of like the hi-hat, and then this one filling out the mid-range a little bit. So for the main hi-hat, we just got this. It's just like this sort of, you know, hard-hitting, punchy hi-hat like this. I've got it going through a bit of chorus to spread it out a little bit, and a bit of saturation to make it a bit more full. And then I just have a high-pass filter cutting out the line. This one's really simple. Definitely the chorus is good with this, though. Again, putting it against reference tracks, I found you really need this to be, like, wide and for it to really sit on top of the mix like that. And yeah, so for the next layer, this one is made using operator, and it sounds like this. So what this is doing is you can hear it's adding that mid-range. Something I noticed, again, putting this up against reference tracks, is that just a bright hi-hat isn't quite enough. It's going to sound a bit too thin in the mix. But if you add this in, you can hear it's filling out that mid-range and kind of giving it some like some attack to it. So with this one, it's just made using operator. We just got a bit of white noise going into a bandpass filter. This is the easiest way to make something like this, where you can just make it yourself. And I just have a bit of saturation on that to make it hit a little bit harder. And yeah, and then the third layer of hi-hat is this one. So this one's actually really similar to the first layer, but you can hear what's happening is it's only playing on every other upbeat. So this just adds a little bit of emphasis in the beat. Something I hear in a lot of house tracks. Honestly, this is kind of my own style as well as something I've done in a few house tracks that I've made. It's just a nice way to like, you know, add something a little bit different there to that beat. That kind of plays off of the groove. So yeah, this one's really simple. You know, it's just like this kind of fat mid-rangey hi-hat. And yeah, and then I have all of those drums in a group together, or a bus, just like I said, with the kick and bass and with the stabs. Helps to tie everything together. So the first thing we got going on this bus here is just a bit of reverb. You can see just kind of helps to put everything in the same space and give everything a little bit more atmosphere. And yeah, after that, I have this audio effect rack. And with this, what we're doing is something I've actually never done on here, which I'm going to start doing a lot more, is multiband processing. So when you're trying to beef up your hi-hats like this, a lot of times, you want to use saturation, right? I mean, this is how it works. You use saturation to make things fat, and then you clean it up with EQ. But you can see, if I just get a drum bus, and say we just put this on here on, like, the medium setting, or even the hard setting. So here that's getting really just sharp and nasty. Like, it is getting fat. You hear that underneath it? This is because you need to treat the mid-range and the high-end a little bit differently. You can't just have them all going through the same saturation and being treated the same way, because that's what will happen. So that is the purpose of this. What I've got here is I have the split into the high-end, the mid-range, and then the low-end, which is really not a lot, but I did spread that out. And then what's happening here is on the high end and the mid-range, you can see I'm processing them differently. So I've got, on the mid-range, I've got this drum bus. Because that's where we want like a lot of attack and a lot of punch. So I've got that on the hard setting, and I've got the transients up, so it's really hitting. And then on the highs, you can see, we just had to use this little saturator here. You can even put that before it. And it's like, you don't need that much. Like, if I put this drum bus on the highs, you can hear it's just going to get way too sharp again. So yeah, like I said, it's all about just going through and like being able to give everything what it needs, as opposed to just putting one uniform thing on top of everything. And this is really simple to do. All you got to do is just make an audio effect rack and get the EQ3 and just split it. And yeah, it's a really efficient method of getting a lot of control over these hi-hats. And then after that audio effect rack, I just have a bit of saturation. Here's without it. It's just a little extra thing to kind of tie everything together. And then the last thing we have on there are these two EQs. So with this one, I'm boosting the high end and cutting the low end, because the high end needed to be a bit sharper. Again, it's just one of those things with making it hit really hard. But then we have this one here, which is actually cleaning it up. So what happens when you boost this is you do get that sharp high end, but then a lot of times you'll get this kind of like nasty whistling stuff. If I turn off this EQ8, you can hear it a little. I'll turn it off and then turn it on. So you know what I mean? When you turn this on, it's still the same thing. It still has that bright high end to it, but we've just gone through and combed out like a few of these frequencies here that are kind of like obnoxious. And I can show you this if I turn this gain up. You hear that like whistling? That's what you're hearing in your track at all times when you don't do this. So it's important to go through and do this on your sounds, especially like hi-hats like this. This is how you get like really full sounding and really professional sounding hi-hats while still having them sound really clean and polished. So that is going to be it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. And let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get the project file and samples and MIDI and presets, all of that from this video in the description. And if you're a patron, on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. Thank you so much, guys, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.